Hello, and welcome to the QMS certification channel. Today, we're continuing our series on ISO 14001 to 2026 and its major updates. In this video, we're going to discuss one of the most important changes in the new version: lifecycle perspective and operational control. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and share this video with professionals interested in environmental management systems and ISO standards. Now let's start with a simple question. What exactly is a lifecycle perspective? Many organizations hear this term and immediately assume it means conducting a complete lifecycle assessment according to ISO 14040. But that is not necessarily the case. Let's simplify the concept. A lifecycle perspective means evaluating the environmental aspects and impacts associated with your product or service throughout its entire journey. In practical terms, from creation to disposal, from raw material acquisition to end-of-life treatment, this is often referred to as from cradle to grave. Now, lifecycle thinking already existed in ISO 14001:2015. However, in the 2026 revision, this concept becomes much more operational and much more integrated into the management system itself. The organization is now expected to actively consider lifecycle stages when defining environmental aspects, operational controls, risk evaluations, and organizational influence over environmental impacts. This is a major evolution. Lifecycle perspective is no longer treated as a theoretical concept. It becomes executable, and that is where many organizations will need to adapt. Now let's clarify something very important. ISO 14001:2026 does not require organizations to perform a full formal lifecycle assessment according to ISO 14040. That remains optional. The standard is not asking every organization to conduct complex environmental footprint studies. Instead, the requirement is to consider life cycle stages when managing environmental aspects and operational controls. That distinction is critical. The organization must demonstrate awareness of life cycle impacts and evaluate where it has control or influence. Now let's make this practical. How can organizations implement life cycle thinking in real operations? Step 1. Map the life cycle stages of your product or service. This can be detailed or relatively simple depending on your organization's complexity. For a product, life cycle stages may include raw material acquisition, purchasing, manufacturing, transportation, customer use, disposal, or recycling. For services, the approach may be different, but the logic remains the same. The organization should understand the environmental impacts associated with each stage. Step 2. Evaluate environmental aspects and impacts within those stages. Where do environmental risks exist? Where is resource consumption significant? Where can waste generation occur? Where does the organization have influence? This is extremely important because ISO 14001 does not require organizations to control everything. It requires organizations to understand where they can influence environmental outcomes. For example, an organization may not control how a customer disposes of a product after use, but it may influence disposal practices through product information, packaging design, or recycling guidance. That influence matters. Step 3. Define operational controls where appropriate. This may include supplier environmental requirements, sustainable purchasing criteria, environmental communication throughout the supply chain, end-of-life disposal instructions, waste reduction controls, or logistics and recycling initiatives. Again, the standard is not prescribing exactly how you must implement this. ISO standards rarely dictate how. They define what must be considered. The organization chooses the most appropriate implementation method based on its operational reality. Now let's discuss what auditors will actually evaluate during ISO 14001 2026 audits. This is important because many organizations become overly concerned about documentation. Auditors are not necessarily expecting a formal lifecycle map or a highly sophisticated environmental model. What auditors want to see is coherence. Does the organization understand its lifecycle stages? Were lifecycle impacts considered during context analysis? Were they considered during risk evaluation? Were they considered when establishing operational controls? Is there alignment between lifecycle thinking and the environmental management system itself? That is the real focus. Organizations may document this formally or address it through integrated operational processes. What matters is evidence that lifecycle perspective was genuinely considered. This change represents one of the most significant evolutions in ISO 14001:2026 because it pushes organizations toward broader environmental responsibility. Environmental management is no longer restricted to internal operations only. Organizations must now think more strategically about their products, services, supply chains, and long-term environmental influence. That is exactly where modern environmental management is heading. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.